Hello, good morning, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is Civic Outlaws. If you were expecting here, this is international flavor. You are mistaken. Of course, I'm going to keep them on the same platform for now. Certainly, it's always going to be on damn radio, but I'm going to record them and keep them just for entertainment purposes and keeping them for later publication on international flavor for now. And there's a reason for that. I don't want to pay for another anything. I don't like paying for extra stuff, so I'm not going to right now. Anyway, I am Samuel Trapp, where we started a new organization. It's called Civic Outlaws. It's been in effect a little more than, since the beginning of the year. Probably, we got our 501c3 authorizations in November sometime, but we didn't really start activities until January 1st. And we came out swinging, that's for sure. And we've got some interesting and cool and informative information on our website, where you can go out and check out our current activities. Our current action tracker is out there. There's a whistleblowers portion, should you like to put it out there. Now, those of you who've listened to me, Samuel Trapp, for a while, know that I have a history, know that I am very vocal about corruption, about government overreach, about bureaucrats taking over the world. You know, they're like Pinky in the brain. But only I'm Pinky and they're the brain. I say, what are we going to do today, bureaucrat? And they go, same thing we do every day, Samkey. Plan to take over the world. And that's what a bureaucrat does. That's what they do. Whether it's the globalist wanker, whether it's the Missouri bar wanker, or whether it is any number of other bureaucrat who loves his position, let's call it that. And they engage in what they call public overreach or overreach. Now, because I made a mistake, and I'm one that tends to admit my mistakes when I'm a bad person, some of you, if you are listening to Damn Radio this morning, are going, wait a second, this guy did this show yesterday. Well, I did, but I cocked up the recording, and it didn't happen appropriately, and so guess what? We're doing it again. And so if you'd like to call in, please do, 573-746-8020. But I never announced it to anyone. All I'm trying to do is retake the information missed so I can store it and record it. And I'm the big part of that is going to be the introduction of an article I wrote. And I wrote this article. It is out on my LinkedIn page. And I will, you go out to LinkedIn, Samuel Trapp, and find me. And you will find it. And you will see that I am a founding member of, Civic Outlaws. And if you click on the Civic Outlaws logo or the post, it'll take you to this article, and you can read it at your own leisure. And if you feel like that, that would be great. And there you have it. But I want to share this article and a bit of analysis on this problem, because this is a true bureaucrat problem. Those of you who know me also know that I was pretty vocal during the Ike Skelton debacle about the overreach of the prosecutor, about the BS of these cameras in the first place, about the flock. And you know what? I haven't checked that in a while. I should look at the flock case going on in Richmond, Virginia, because their flock was not allowed to participate. And their lawyers tried to intervene twice, and they wanted to file a friend of the court brief, whether that be amicus or whether it was they get to enter in as a party, although they're not sued. They want to be the friend of the court. This is what powerful money people do. Heck, Civic Outlaws plans to be the friend of the court in many things. We are working together with Modern Law Ecosystem, which I'm also a founder of, and you can go out to modernlawecosystem.com. That website is under development right now, and that's going to be worldwide, in fact, and enormous. I am thinking extremely large here. The practice of law is changing, and I'm going to give you a critical thought process about that, probably here on our Civic Outlaws channel before too long. This is going to be a weekly, for now, program. I think weekly might be a little too much. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I do my International Flavor radio show Monday through Thursday from 7:30 until 9. And on Friday, we're tacking into there on damradio.com/live. And every program is live. You can phone in at 573-746-8020. Usually in studio. If there's not, that'll be out. I've got a little mini set of equipment, and I've got an interview platform, and I have press credentials, and I do intend to go to places and interview people, man on the street type or whatever, or go interview people. They don't need to come to the studio. I'll go to them. I'll go to press conferences and whatnot, like I did in Russia. And if you want to go to my I tried to clean up my LinkedIn page to reflect all of that properly, and I linked a couple of my Russian language articles out there too. And I hate to too blatantly promote myself, but a lot of these things I think are very important. International events I think are important. I wouldn't be doing International Flavor, my radio program. I think that the mainstream media gets it wrong far too often, or they pump a narrative far too often. And I don't discriminate. I hate everyone equally. I take them all apart, and I don't like slanting stuff one way or the other. I'm more or less conservative, but I also have some pretty strong opinions about what goes on internationally and the mistakes that our country has made in a long, long time. I'm a patriot in America, and I always have been. I was a diplomatic interpreter it was subordinate to the State Department, but it was an agency called the On-Site Inspection Agency, which is now the Nuclear Threat Reduction Agency, I believe. They change acronyms like other people change their underwear in Washington, D.C., and whoever's in charge this month changes it to whatever. Some bureaucrat will change everything around. And I have very little trust in any of it anymore. And so that is unfortunate, but true if you grew up in the 90s, if you grew up there in the Clinton, Bush, Cheney, Obama, and even Trump. Okay, so I don't discriminate. I don't like things being twisted against the citizenry. Okay, I want government to act on my behalf, or on our behalf, not just me, but I consider myself the average white guy. I want them to look out for not just white guys, not just average white guys, but average brown people too. And I fight that stuff, and always have. Okay, I fight overreach. And anybody who knows me knows I have, whether it's from being a sergeant in the Army, and they called me Sergeant ? Whether it's wondering why we were doing idiotic things on Area 51 and on the Nevada nuclear test site, or what that was. I've always been. I don't know, a non-believer, in the typical line. And so it's not something that was developed. It's a natural thing for me. I just don't believe because you tell me something that it's accurate. So I like to dig in and find things and go for things. And so that's a little bit about me, okay? I also have plenty of history. You want to go back and check out all of my other stuff. There's plenty of it in past episodes of internationalflavor.com because they've been doing it. Geez, we got to be running on 2 years, especially in the, it was February of, I think it was, is it 3 years? Holy crap. I could be getting old, I am old. But anyway, I've been publicly voicing my opinions on Ukraine since the day it started. So that's 4 years. And after Tucker Carlson did his interview, I did a critique of that in Russian and put it on the YouTube, and I have still got, 15,000 followers in my Russian channel. And so, I tend to dig a little bit, and I hope that this helps other people when I do it. This article is a bit of a long read. It's written in the style of a legal brief without all the lawyerly crap. Okay, and so I'm more of a section person. So each part will have the headline of the story. The story is called "Liquor License Dispute Leads to Creation of Civic Outlaws, a New Charity Targeting Government Overreach." That's the title. It's a long title, but that's how a legal brief one is written. You put whatever your proposition is up on top, and then you defend it as you go through the document. Okay, and so they're subtopic heavy, and so I've got these, and you can read the little subtopics. And usually, if it's decently written, which I'm not claiming that mine is, although I'm a fairly good writer, the the subtopics will give you kind of the narrative, that you would break down for your thesis, and the narrative you could read just those 5 or 8, whatever the hell it is, sub topics, and get an idea of where I'm going. Okay, so as I go through this, I hope not to stop too much because I would like it to be clarity. But the beauty of being on a radio program and today having no time limit because it's just recording for as long as I choose. Actually, that's not necessarily true because I'd have to throw up some kind of other block. But it's I have about 2.5 hours should I like to go through this and chat it up with you. So if you happen to be listening and you'd like to call in, please do. 573-746-8020. If you'd like to keep it to this topic, that would be fantastic. And but my main goal today is to replace the content I didn't record yesterday. And on the real anniversary, I cocked it up, like I said. Anyway, I want to get that article to you, and there are some other things that I may throw in there as I recall them while I read through this transcript. But the government, the structure of the government, okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a backdrop, okay, there, and then I won't have to interrupt while I start reading this story. There has always been, and everybody took their civics classes in 10th grade or whatever it was, and everybody took their administrative law in law school, in their second year of law school. And administrative law is gives you the outline of how the administrative state is supposed to work. They go through administrative decisions. They go through the power of the bureaucrat, basically. And if you're a discriminating law school student, you will look at that and go, geez, what a racket. This is a racket. Unelected a-holes running the whole show. And, this is administrative law. They get in there, and trust me, they know what they are doing. The career bureaucrat, 9 times out of 10, is a lawyer anyway. And they don't practice. They don't have to. They get to take all the power without doing anything. They just seize power. But unfortunately, a lot of times they don't even have a law degree. And a lot of these people become career, and I'm not discriminating against people who don't have law degrees, but Jesus, don't act like you know what the law is doing if you don't even have the training. And that is the state of our nation, or at least in the last good number of years. What I did want to do, because I've never done it, is go out and get for you, which I didn't do, but I'm going to. I was getting the flock camera, Virginia, try to get some kind of a police department issue of public release on that, which they're trying to defend themselves. And then I wanted to also get what was the Chevron case that was overturned by Loper Bright. So Loper Bright is a United States Supreme Court case. And I wanted to make sure that I was giving the proper information on the case that it overturned, okay? Because this is important, people. And so that case was called Chevron USA Incorporated versus Natural Resources Defense Council, Inc., and NRDC, okay? And basically, that case was tried in 1983, the year I graduated high school, okay? And that, I'm also, frequently taking sips of coffee whilst in the studio, and that could be distracting. I apologize for it in advance. I can't even speak. But Chevron USA Inc. vs. NRDC, the link for that, not link, but the U.S. Supreme Court reference for that is 467 U.S. 837, decided in 1984. And basically the primary holding, the law created by that Supreme Court case, if you will, and always they're repeating other people's facts, okay? This one said a government agency must conform to clear legislative statements when interpreting and applying law. But, and here's the but, this is the important part, courts will give the agency deference in ambiguous situation as long as the interpretation is reasonable. Now think about how ludicrous that decision was in the first place, okay? So, hey, bureaucrat, since you're such a professional, and you're a professional bureaucrat, you know what? Perhaps we should let you interpret the legislative intent. That's nonsense, okay? I thought it in law school. I think it today. I've always thought that way. That is just nonsense. The interpreters of the law are supposed to be the judicial branch, right? The judges, for God's sake. That's who interprets the law. I don't care about some bureaucrat, saying, no, we think we know what they wanted and we're the professionals, right? So that case, and you know what I'll do, just because we're not subject to any time limit today, I'm going to give you the facts, the mini fact pattern of that case, because I think it's important. Okay, so the facts of that case: Congress amended the Clean Air Act in 1977 that imposed certain requirements on states that had not attained the national air quality standards previously established by the EPA. One of these requirements was that these non-attainment states set up a permit program that regulated new or modified major stationary sources of air pollution. Under EPA regulations promulgated in 1981 to supplement that requirement, a state could adopt a plant-wide definition of the term stationary source, such that an existing plant with several pollution-emitting devices could install or modify one piece of equipment without needing a permit, if the alteration did not increase total emissions at the plant. This was known as the bubble concept because it allows a state to treat all devices within the plant as though they were encased in a single bubble. So they aren't going to regulate just one piece of equipment in the plant. They're going to regulate the whole plant and shut the entire plant down instead of a particular machine, basically. The amended clean, or vice versa. If you want to get a new one in there and they don't like the new one, they're not going to allow you to put in the new one because it would, they'll shut down the whole plant if you do, because it will, what do you call it? the bubble effect, since it's one plant, one location, you're not targeting a particular machine. This is complicated stuff. This is, and how in the world is an EPA guy gonna? Who said he gets to decide this question? Well, Supreme Court. We'll get to that in a second. So this is known as bubble concept because it allowed a state to treat all the devices within a plant as though they were encased in a single bubble. And the facts. The amended Clean Air Act does not explicitly define what Congress meant by a stationary source to which the permit program should apply, meaning they didn't say whether it should be the whole plant or just the piece of equipment, and that the issue was not squarely addressed in the legislative history, meaning the court goes back through the legislative history and says they discussed this, they discussed that, and when they implemented the law, here's some of the discussions they had on the floor, and the discussions on the floor addressed whether the piece of machinery was going to be an independent piece of machinery or what it would affect the entire plant, and they didn't discuss that in this legislative history, is what they're saying. That they didn't say whether it would affect the entire plant or just the machine. So the court went through all of that. And then the question before the court is whether the EPA's allowance of this bubble concept, the EPA, an administrative agency, created this bubble concept, not the legislature. And is this a reasonable instruction of what the legislature said? Okay. Now, this is nonsense, friends and neighbors, but, is the, can it be said, it was said, by the way, under the Chevron doctrine, that these concepts, as long as they're based on a reasonable construction of the statute itself, and, by the way, any associated discussion earlier that is reflected by the final transcript of what comes out in the statute, of these statutory terms, the statutory term, stationary source, in this case, okay? So that is there. The issue was whether Congress had the specific intention on the applicability of the bubble concept in this case. And the holding was, no, the legislation in its history suggested that Congress did not have the specific intent to apply the bubble concept in these cases. So the court got that part right, okay? And the second issue, whether a court may adopt a static judicial definition of a statutory term when it determines that Congress itself didn't command that definition. Okay? No, and here's the holding. This is the bullshit holding of them all. No, I shouldn't talk like that. That's bad language. But no, a court may not substitute its own construction of a statutory provision for a reasonable interpretation made by the administrator of an agency. What? Do you understand that? This is the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Bunch of morons didn't go to civics class in 1983 or 1965 for them, or maybe sooner, 1945. They're all like 90. And so they ruled that, no, the court's not going to substitute its interpretation for, a regulatory expert, a bureaucrat. What kind of crap is that? Nothing in my civics class or in my administrative law second-year law school class said that the person that should interpret the law is the administrator, is the bureaucrat. That's nowhere out there. My 10th grade teacher civics class didn't say, hey, Sam, let's ask you a question on the divisions of power in the United States. And we have the legislative branch, we have the judicial branch, and we had the executive branch run by the governor of a state, or the president in the case of the United States. He's the head of the executive branch, which is the administrative function that carries out all the laws created by the legislature and interpreted by. The proper answer they gave in 1983 wasn't interpreted by the court. It was interpreted by the bureaucrat. What kind of crap is that? That's the worst jump of logical leap ever, okay? In my humble opinion. That's not ever. There's been some other ones, but it quietly went by. And this is part. And so since 1983, 40 years, well, 1984 was the decision, but for 40 years, states, and especially the federal government, has lived under this concept that the bureaucrat is God, okay? And the bureaucrat, if the legislature is too stupid to put in the proper definitions of a term, that the bureaucrat gets to define it. Now, that's harsh saying coming from Samuel Edward von Trapp III, or whatever the hell JR calls me. It is harsh, but this is a harsh world. I don't believe the founders, let's throw them out there. Ben Franklin with a great big signature, John Hancock with a huge signature out there. You know, everybody signing, the important documents of forming the country. You know, this young infant country that's going to be the best country on the planet was destroyed by decisions like this. Okay, this is a crap decision all across the board. And this is the unfortunate part of the judicial branch in the first place. The judicial branch is just as subject to politics as all the rest, which is why it moves so slowly. And, because half of the people, let's call it 51% goes extreme right 1 year, and then 5 years later, it's 51% going extreme left, and they make decisions that have to work their way for 5 years through a legal system. It's crap. And so don't go thinking that the judicial branch are the good guys either, because they're just as subject to the wrong stuff, and the people who need to know that are the people that Civic Outlaws wants to talk to. And perhaps maybe we can do something about this, because a lot of people say you got to work within the system to fix the system. Well, if you don't know what the problem is, you sure as hell can't fix it, can you? The Supreme Court of the United States in 2024 decided this case that I was telling you about called Loper Bright. In Loper Bright, a similar issue to what was presented in, oops, sorry, my phone's ringing and it shouldn't be. Too loud, I need to get rid of that. And I have to send the person a message, so I'm very sorry, whilst I turn it off. So I'm sorry, but I can't do two things at once. Everybody knows that. Anyway, I'll try to cut this part out when I edit the show for publication. Anyway, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo. Okay, and the historic decision, right? This is the history-making decision of the Chevron doctrine, which is what they called this. So the Chevron doctrine, the bureaucrat gets to keep in his pocket for 40 years every time somebody tries to tell him what to do. The career bureaucrat gets to pull out of his pocket. Well, yeah, I know the statute doesn't say that, but I'm the king. I'm the king. The bureaucrat is the king. I'm the head of an agency, and therefore I'm God. And so I interpret it this way. And if you want to go to the Supreme Court, well, they're not going to, rule your way, because they defer to our interpretations as long as we can claim they're reasonable. I claim this is reasonable. Would you like to fight that now? Would you like to submit to what I'm telling you as the regulator? Because this is what I'm supposed to, you're supposed to submit to me. This is what you have to do, public. You have to submit to me because I am God bureaucrat. I always just talk about the God Emperor because I like that title. God Emperor of Dune was one of my favorite books. And so if I want a good title, you can refer to me as God Emperor. But if you're a bureaucrat, maybe you can be the God bureaucrat, okay? And that's what they thought they were. And well, they still think they are, unfortunately, because people aren't questioning him enough. However, we are civic outlaws. We create civic warriors. If you'd like to be a civic warrior, join us. You come in, whatever level. Our donation pages are up and out there. It's expensive to go after bureaucrats. It is not simple. And it costs a lot of time and a lot of money. And I'm telling you, they don't make it easy. And if you go out to civicoutlaws.com, you'll see how difficult these people make it. They turned a document against us and said that this document was going to be, it was the documents that we requested in a sunshine request, not Civic Outlaws, but one of the founding members, that one of the documents we requested, one of the series of documents we requested, was going to take 44 plus years to provide, and the total cost, payable in advance, by the way, friends and neighbors, $360-something thousand. And they couldn't guarantee it even then, because they may have to go to the Missouri legislature to get some more help. And anytime there's a budgetary person to add, they could only guarantee us 5 hours a week, because these documents were all, they identified $300,000. I forget what it was. 36,000 documents or something like that, 600,000 emails that they would have to review in order to do it. Well, nobody said they had to review all of this crap. They just give it to us. It's public overreach. We're public. Why don't you just send it to us? No. We got to have a lawyer review this and codify. That's your own problem. That's not my problem. Why don't you just send me the documents and be done with it? And, but the ludicrousness of sending me a bill that says it's going to take you 42 years to provide the documents, and you can't provide them because you need to get another bureaucrat on board solely for that purpose, is crap. They're public records anyway. Why don't you provide them to me? And why can't you provide them in electronic format? Why are you still charging me 10 cents a copy or more to copy the damn things? Just put it on a thumb drive like everybody else does and turn them over to me. Nobody turns over paper documents. These people did, and charged the crap out of us for doing it. I forget what it was, $6,000 or something to date that we've spent getting records. And those 4,500, 5,000 pages, something like that. So we're well over 10 cents a page. It's nonsense. And hell, that's $1 a page. What am I talking about? I can't do my own 10th grade arithmetic. Anyway, the key portions of Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimundo are this. Chevron was overruled and this is written by the Liberty Justice Center, so it could be twisted a little bit for us, okay? And the Liberty Justice Center was instrumental in making sure that, or promoting amicus briefing, and press releasing this information. Okay, and basically, and they were instrumental in helping get it done. And so I don't know if you understand what amicus brief means, but what it is basically, it's called a friend of the court for simple English. And basically, so I sue my friend for, I don't know what, stealing my cow. And, he sues me for saying, well, you left the cow on my property too long. Of course I stole it. And we argue that fact out. Well, what an amicus brief is somebody comes in who has an interest in property rules all over the country and go, wait a minute, you don't get to steal somebody's cow because he hung out on your land too long, or you do because he supports the property. And he writes a friend of the court amicus brief supporting that theory, because he has interests and members that support property rights, okay? And somebody else likes cows and likes that you can't go, rustling cattle just because the cow crossed the line. That's why we have brands on the cow in the first place. And by the way, I heard that there's some real serious rules about branding cows even now. And they try to properly recognize their cows with the tags on the ear and the brands on the tail or the butt. And anyway, that's a different theory altogether. But you have another person submitted amicus brief, who, especially when you get to the higher levels, that says, hey, here's the issue. And we believe that this is cattle theft. This is rustling cattle. We don't like this. And so both of them write a brief to the court. It's not just the lawyer of the parties that are involved. It's lawyers of other people similarly interested. that get to do it. They have to do it with permission of the court most of the time, that they have to petition the court to be allowed to do it. I was telling you about in Flock camera case in Richmond, Virginia, the last time I looked, which was around the time Eichster was forced to plead guilty improperly, in my opinion. And he should have fought it, but I get why he did what he did. It makes absolute sense to me, and I honor his decision to make it, and I honor the decision to get rid of BS in your life, because trust me, it's easier than the fight. And I don't want to call it easier, because that's not it either. Less expensive and maybe right for you at the time, especially if you don't have time to pay lawyers and other similarly situated assholes to pay for this nonsense. They price justice outside of the normal person's reach. And so who always wins? The bureaucrat, because they don't have to worry about spending your money to attack you. They have it. They control your money anyway through taxes and all the other stuff. And ever since then, Chevron has, ever since 1983 at least, Chevron has said that, of course we're going to defer to the bureaucrat. They know everything, and they've been there for a while, and this is a huge portion of the bureaucratic state. So I was telling you that this Loper Bright thing that they have listed here, Chevron is overruled. And this historic decision that was issued June the 28th of 2024, I'm reading their content of the overruled. The Supreme Court formally overturned the Chevron doctrine, a rule it adopted in 1984 under which federal courts defer to federal agencies' interpretation of their own power as a matter of course. That's a scary sentence, but that's true. The court ruled in favor of the herring fishermen who argued their case. So these herring fishermen grouped together, came up against Raimondo in a case called Loper Bright Enterprises, which, fishes herring, versus Raimondo, who's some, I forget which agency he's with. Before the court, they argued it before the court in the January 2024 session. In December 2022, the Liberty Justice Center, this person similar to what we're creating with Civic Outlaws, filed an amicus brief in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo alongside the Cato Institute, and they urged the Supreme Court to hear the case and strike down Chevron as unconstitutional and ahistorical, meaning against history. Again, well, like I just said, against history, against the historic interpretation of the Founding Fathers' intent in creating three branches of government. And after the court granted the petition for certiorari, means they decided to hear the case. 90% of the case, more than that, 99% of the cases, they refused to hear and just go, it's too important for us to get busy with that. They only hear 6% of cases that are submitted to them. The rest they just ignore completely. So when you go to the Supreme Court, good luck, because they're just as bureaucratic as the rest. Okay, they just they try, they sit in their huge hall of justice and decide who gets liberty and who doesn't. Anyway, these fishermen, these agencies supporting the fishermen filed an amicus brief in July of 2023 and urged the Supreme Court to overturn Chevron because it unconstitutionally delegated the judicial branch's interpretive authority to the executive branch. It's quite true, by the way. For decades, the Chevron doctrine has allowed unaccountable agencies and bureaucrats to determine the scope of their own power and to use that excessive power to run roughshod over Americans' rights. We applaud the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Chevron, restore courts' power to independently interpret statute, and significantly rein in the administrative state's unlawful overreach, said senior counsel Lauren Seahays. Now that courts are no longer shackled to agency interpretations, agency rules can be fairly interpreted, and we look forward to challenging overreach. Now that's important, friends and neighbors. And that's not me. That's although I know it too, it's not me stating that. These are some high-level muckety-mucks, right? These are people involved in the process. These aren't people sniping from the sidelines, and I no longer want to snipe from the sidelines. Everybody knows that I got plenty of skeletons in my closet for attacking the state of Missouri. Buttloads of them. So I can't remember. Last time I looked on the federal court, it was like 62 or something times I had a suit filed in federal court, and more than half of those were against state actors. When I was practicing law, I believe it's part of why I was targeted by Sam Phillips, another bureaucrat, although the bar is untouchable. Well, that's another story, and I've talked about that in prior episodes. You can go of international flavor. You can go back and get my words on that all you'd like. Okay, and that's absolutely true too. And it's also absolutely true that there's a process in Missouri that has actually been sent to many other states that bears significant reason to be hated. And my ire is directed at this process too, because it allows this type of bureaucratic crap to continue. And that is the alleged nonpartisan bar plan. Well, it's not the nonpartisan bar plan, but it's the nonpartisan, as a joke that was trying to be funny, it's the nonpartisan judicial selection plan. And a committee of the bar has the power to promote who they want to act in their own behalf to the extreme disenfranchisement of the public. But oh no, it's untouchable, because why? In the 30s, there were corrupt union bosses that controlled in Missouri, between Kansas City and Missouri. They controlled Jefferson City by appointing all the judges to the Missouri Supreme Court or to either of any of the appellate courts. So we still have leftover remnants of that, which you could argue that they did need to do something to stop the heavy-duty pressure by outside actors like the union bosses that controlled much of it and therefore controlled the judiciary. You see that in movies all the time, and everybody takes it as a matter of course. However, nobody wants to say the same thing against the Missouri bar, although it's just as crap. The process of selection of these people, they're not selected by the people, not remotely. You want to hear detailed analysis of that? Go to prior programs that I did. But that's a little further than I want to go, and I don't want to spend the whole time of the show speaking on that. And so with that backdrop, okay, of the Chevron doctrine being overturned in 2024 on June the 28th, that happened. The Missouri Congress, the legislature of Missouri, took action. And they, as of August 28th of 2025, enacted a new statute, okay? Or they revised an existing statute. That statute was revised statute, State of Missouri, 536.140. Okay, 140 said or says now there, and I went through this a little bit yesterday, so I want to make sure to go through it today to make sure that when you go out to the reviser of statutes and everything, all of this is public document. You can go to reviser.mo.gov and get all the statutes. And they do a pretty good job of, in fact, a really good job if all you're doing is looking at the Missouri statutes and you're not looking for history, although a lot of times down below there's a lot of legislative or case history that you can click on and follow what courts have said about this statute or whatever. It's a decent free research source, even for lawyers, and you can go in there and have a look at what it is. So the basics of this 536.140 is for judicial review. This is how the legislature says that judicial review should be conducted when a citizen makes a complaint about a statute, a regulation, an action by an administrator, an action by somebody in a county or a city administrator that changes the rules, all of these things. When a judge is interpreting these things, they have to, when the case is before a court or it's being interpreted or it's even an administrative law judge, these things have to be considered in 536.140, which was effective August 28th of 2005. That's when the law was written, gave the instructions for how the court is supposed to, by the legislature, of how the court is supposed to interpret executive actions against citizenry. Okay? That's the basics of it, right? Under that, there was a paragraph that used to say, because down below, when you're on the reviser's site, it actually does a pretty good job. You can go down to the bottom and click on the history of this statute, and it will give you the history of the statute. So you go and you see the date down below, where the effective date of 536.140 that I'm reading from now was effective at August 28th of 2005, and the authority of that statute ended August 28th, 2025. So it was in effect for a full 20 years. And then above it, you can click on the link for the one that is effective now as of August 28th of 2025. Okay? So I'm going to read to you the important subparagraph 3, what it said before 2025, August 28th, and what it now says, 2025, that is effective. Okay? The important part was this. Here was the prior paragraph 3, subparagraph to 536.140. Whenever the action of the agency being reviewed by the court does not involve the exercise by the agency of administrative discretion in the light of the facts, but only involves the application by the agency of the law to the facts, the court may, upon application of any party, conduct a de novo review of the agency decision. And then paragraph 4 said, wherever under subsection 3 or other. So basically that outlined a person's right to file a motion for declaratory judgment, declaratory relief in the court. Usually Cole County Circuit Court, because most of those are filed in Cole County, unless you want to go after a regulator in a particular area. There are strategic parts for reviewing that, and I don't think there's any specific thing says all should be filed. Any state one should usually be filed in Cole County anyway, because they're the best people to interpret it, because they get them all the time. And so they're regulatory interpretations or bureaucratic overreach. That has to be filed in Cole County. Well, it doesn't have to be, but 99% of the time you would want to file it there anyway. So under subsection 4, old version, wherever under subsection 3, the one that allows you to sue, or otherwise the court is entitled to weigh the evidence and determine the facts on its own. So the court gets to weigh the evidence. The court may hear and consider additional evidence if the court finds that the evidence in exercise of reasonable diligence could not have produced or was improperly excluded at the hearing before the agency. Meaning, this is only an appellate type. So if somebody else considered it at the administrative level, the court may or may not take additional evidence that might be missing from the record down below. Okay, wherever the court is not entitled to weigh the evidence or determine facts for itself. So this is, a lot of times it says in a statute, the legislature will limit what the court can do and say, oh, listen, you can only talk, you can't get new facts out there. You can't present new evidence. You can only consider what happened below. Okay, you can only, that is what it used to say. Okay, if the court finds there's a competent and material evidence which, in the exercise of reasonable diligence, could not have been produced or was improperly excluded at the hearing before the agency, meaning if the agency, who are also a bunch of bureaucrats, they may be decision committees, but they're bureaucrats. If they left out this evidence or material in the exercise of reasonable diligence, the court may remand the case to the agency. They can say, nah, we're sending it back. There's evidence that you could have listened to and you didn't. So listen to the new evidence and then make a decision. And if that decision takes care of the issue, well, there you go. They can abdicate their responsibility to, maybe not, but they can send it back down to the court below to consider. Now, agencies can't hear constitutional challenges anyway, so ultimately you'll probably end up in front of the Cole County Circuit Court in the first place. But anyway, they would give directions to consider that evidence, consider the decision in light of the evidence that could or should have been permitted. The court may, in any case, hear and consider evidence of alleged irregularities and procedure or unfairness by the agency that are not shown in the record. That's what it used to say, okay? Now, that's discombobulated nonsense anyway. I think it should always be the court determining, more power than the Administrative Hearing Commission or a regulator or group of regulators beating up on a citizen, because that's what they do. Sometimes they're so slanted you don't even really present any evidence. You just present the record. It's an administrative function. You're issuing a license. You're, deciding whether something can be built. You're given a permit, whatever, in an administrative law case. And so in these administrative law cases, the court would always assume that the facts were considered properly, and if the ruling didn't reflect realistic or adequate or sometimes a bigger case examination of the facts, then the court could overrule that decision and say, no, the law means X, but the law should be determined by then. But after Loper Bright, so even Missouri had some of the, it was a tiny bit tougher inside of Missouri, but really still the bureaucrats making the decision, okay? So that all changed August 28 of 2025, okay? Because the new version of 536.140 reads as follows when you have the same sort of thing, interpreting a statute, interpreting a decision that the bureaucrat made below, an activity of a bureaucrat, in creating his own little kingdom, which they, can't help but do, especially since 1983. And the Missouri didn't do anything about it until 2005. But they always let the administrator do what he wanted, right? And all that changed August 28, 2025, which is why it's so important to have a Civic Outlaws type organization inside the state of Missouri, attached to national issues as well, but focused at least initially on Missouri crap, and there's plenty of it to go around. So this the new statute says as follows, okay, in subparagraph 3, okay. I'll read you 3 and 4, and these are effective as of August 28, 2025. So subparagraph 3 says, in interpreting a state statute, rule, regulation, or other subregulatory document, now that's a hell of a lot more than it said previously. It's right there. A court or an officer hearing an administrative action shall not. Now, shall not, those are powerful words. It doesn't say, maybe. It says shall not. And it shall not determine what in the hell, the court shall do as follows, okay? And let's see. Shall not defer to a state agency's interpretation of such statute, rule, regulation, or other document. That's a powerful sentence in the state of Missouri. Shall not. The legislature is making groundbreaking and very clear direction of what the citizens of Missouri want. They are the people who were elected. So rarely does I hate to be too anti because they got it right here, but it's the BS of being a politician is sometimes difficult, and I realize you got to, horse trade quite a bit in politics to get what you want, but here it worked out. Or to get what you think your constituents want, I get that. But I honor the legislature that acts on behalf of his constituents. I don't. I love in Missouri that they're temporary, that they have term limits. That alone is enough for me to say hands off and let them do what they want. If they're doing damage, they can only do it for so long. If they're being great, well, sometimes I'd like to keep them, but it's better to, have one person get screwed over or the constituents get screwed over by not having a similar, a person acting on their behalf than it is to have corruption that's inherent in the system if you allow them to live in power eternally. That's a Sam concept right there. You don't have to agree with that or disagree with that. And if somebody is term limited, I'll continue to vote for them. If someone is not term limited and they have been there, longer than 2 terms, I never vote for them. Never. I will not vote for somebody who's been in office more than 2 terms unless they're term limited, by 3, 4, whatever. And in Missouri, our state guys are term limited. So that's a philosophical thing for me. It has nothing to do with real politics. It has to do with power. So anyway, I'm sorry to get sidetracked with that, but the state legislature in this instance got it absolutely right, 536-140, subparagraph 3, when they directed that the court shall not defer. And then the next part of the same sentence, and it says, shall, they must, interpret the meaning and effect of whatever the state agent or bureaucrat did de novo. De novo means brand new review. It doesn't matter what the bureaucrat said. It matters that's all circumstances surrounding that decision made by a bureaucrat, including a bureaucratic agency, including a bureaucrat in the capacity of a hearing officer. Okay. And then it continues. Another sentence. In actions brought against a state agency, after applying all customary tools of interpretation, the court or hearing officer, here it comes again, here's that interesting word, shall decide any remaining doubt. Like tie goes to, who does the tie go to in these cases? In favor of a reasonable interpretation that limits agency power and maximizes individual liberty. So the state of Missouri, through the legislature, has just thrown a bomb into the bureaucrats' nest. And it is a nest because they never leave. You're in a nest because they never have to perform. They get a free paycheck. Everybody always complains, oh, geez, those poor administrators don't make any money. My ass, they control the world and they get a fair pay and they get unbelievable benefits. And if they didn't want the power, they wouldn't stay there in the first place. Now, that's harsh too. I'm a harsh person when it comes to that. Go out in the real world and see if you can be in charge of life. Doesn't work that way. Why should it work for the government when the citizens want a government that is limited in scope and power? That's what we want. If you're a true American, that's what you want. You don't want a stronger government, except in, arguably some of the military stuff. So although even that is all controlled by outsiders these days, I believe that these things have made it possible to attack the bureaucratic overreach of the state of Missouri, which is the reason for the founding of Civic Outlaws at this time. It's the perfect time. And so the brief I'm going to read to you, and then I'll close the show today, is something that I wrote that goes a particular case. It'll talk about the case. Now, you don't have to agree with the premise of the case to believe that what I just outlined to you is anything less than true and accurate. Everything I've outlined to you, according to what the state must do, what the U.S. government, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, will take place in federal agencies, in as far as being interpreted. What it limited what the executive branch gets to do to interpret all of these things, and through their career bureaucrats, which I believe should be term limited at the federal level too, but they're not. Bureaucrats are not terminated if it's just a job. They sit there regardless of who's in power. If they don't like who's in power, they mark time until that person is no longer in power, until they get a friend in office, and then they go back to regulation as usual. So, and I believe that's what's going to occur with the Trumpster. That 3 years will be marking time, and then hopefully will be set up to keep this activity going on a federal level as well, because I ain't afraid of them either. I should be, I suppose, because people get murdered. People end up dead on back streets like they used to charge the Soviet the Soviet Tsaru about. I'm sorry, that's the Ukrainian version. Anyway, that's paragraph 3. That is powerful. And then paragraph 4 tells how you're going to exclude and exclude, similarly to what the paragraph 4 said before. But the important part is that subparagraph 3, which is the bomb thrown in to the nest of vipers at the bureaucratic level. Okay? Now, with all that backdrop, which hopefully you listened to, and I hope you had the time to go through this with me, because it's been about an hour. I'm going to go another half an hour or so should take me to get through this article and any associated stuff, and then the program will end. And you can find this article if you want to stop listening. Please do, but read the article. The article is out on my LinkedIn page, which let me give you my LinkedIn address, which I don't know, used to be something easy, but I haven't used LinkedIn. I only recently repaired the page so it reflects who I am properly, and it says that I am, if I look at the page, where am I? Scooby-Dooby-Doo-Doo. I am at Samuel Trapp is my address. And Samuel Trapp is who I am. And if I, was sharing the channel, and it has out there, the home of Civic Outlaws, which is a new page I created, the home of modern law ecosystem, my Международный вкус на русском, my Russian site on YouTube, and my international flavor website, which I put all of my shows out on international flavor as they occur 4 times per week. Okay, so that's how you find me, Samuel Trapp on LinkedIn. And my article is out there in a post of Thursday, I believe it was, that I did that post. Let me put on my glasses, and I'm going to read to you this article. And I think I did a pretty good job of not directing this to lawyers or to other people, that are obsessed with the legal backdrop, but with clarity so that people can understand the issue, okay? And especially here in Missouri. And so liquor license dispute leads to the creation of Civic Outlaws, a new charity targeting government overreach by Samuel Trapp. It's a subparagraph. Remember I told you subparagraphs reflect, whatever, it doesn't matter. Government creep, administrative autonomy, and the moment the line was crossed. And so we begin. Government overreach rarely announces itself with a press conference. More often, it arrives quietly through internal emails, revised enforcement priority, and a growing comfort with discretion untethered from statute. This article is not about a particular business model, a controversial industry, or a single licensing dispute. It's about the quieter phenomenon, government creep, the gradual expansion of administrative authority beyond its lawful lane, justified internally as efficiency, autonomy, or the policing of morality. At the center of this story is a state licensing agency charged with narrow, well-defined mission, regulating the sale of alcohol under Chapter 311 of Missouri law. That's alcohol control. Licensing regimes are supposed to be mundane. They involve posted permits, compliance checks, clearly articulated rules. They are not intended to become a moral tribunal or a substitute for a criminal court. Yet beginning in 2022, internal alcohol tobacco control, ATC, communications reflect a notable shift in posture, one that treats statutory boundaries as flexible and agency discretion as expansive. Now, with my explanation to you of Loper Bright and all that, this is commentary outside the article, with my explanation of Loper Bright, Chevron, and Missouri Reach, how can you blame them? They've been for years allowed to run roughshod over citizens, and they like it. They're used to it. In those internal communications, senior leadership of the ATC described the agency as blessed to operate with an abundance of autonomy, while discussing the discovery of a statute that, by the agency's own admission, had not been previously understood or enforced. That language matters. It does not reflect caution, uncertainty, or deference to a legislature. It reflects a bureaucrat's confidence, a confidence that her interpretation is more than a valid substitute for the law, and that enforcement priorities can be re-engineered from within. Now, a side point here, all the documents that are referenced in this are available at civicoutlaws.com under current events or recent activity or whatever that says out there. I've got it pulled up, but I'm not going to go look at it. Copies of these internal communications have been publicly released and are already available through Civic Outlaws published materials. They are referenced here not to litigate personality, but to document institutional mindset, one in which administrative discretion is understood as sufficiently broad to reshape enforcement without new legislation, rulemaking, or clear public notice. That mindset collided inevitably with a changing legal landscape. In June of 2024, United States Supreme Court decided Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, recentering courts, not agencies, as the ultimate interpreter of statutory meaning. Missouri followed the same path. Effective August 28, 2025, Missouri law now directs courts to decide all questions of law without deference to agency interpretations. The message is unmistakable. Administrative confidence is not legal authority, and statutory meaning does not expand by internal bureaucratic consensus. This article is written at the intersection of those two moments, an internal expansion of perceived autonomy on the one hand, and a judicial and legislative reassertion of limits on the other. The dispute that follows, while originating in a specific licensing context, raises a broader question with consequences far beyond alcohol regulation. What happens when an agency treats discretion as power, interpretation as law, and licensure as leverage, after courts have said that deference is over? Civic Outlaws exists because that question is no longer theoretical. It is being lived, litigated, and paid for in real time by regulated citizens and businesses. This article does not ask readers to take sides on policy preferences or cultural debates. It asks something far more basic and far more American, that government agencies stay in their lane, read the statutes they are given, and respect the limits imposed by law. The rest of this article explains how the line was crossed, why it matters, and why administrative autonomy, however blessed, cannot replace constitutional accountability. The anti-deference shift, why courts, not bureaucrats, decide what a statute means. A liquor license is supposed to be boring. It's a tax stamp with rules. Post a license, check ID, don't serve to minors, don't let fights spill in the parking lot. It is not supposed to be an open-ended character trial, a morality referendum, or a bureaucratic guessing game where a business owner has to predict what a state agent thinks is lewd on any given night. And yet in Missouri, that's exactly the kind of government creep this story exposes. Creep as a noun, the creeping expansion of power, and creep as an action, the practice of sliding authority into places it was never granted. That creep is why a new charitable organization, Civic Outlaws, exists, to put a public spotlight on administrative overreach, weaponized discretion, and the quiet normalization of because we said so government. Now, I'm going to stop right here because there's also a third, and you can call it a noun as well, the government creep. Just take a picture of your favorite bureaucrat and throw it up there. That's your government creep. but I didn't want to be horrible in my story. And there's a second part of it too. Remember, I make a lot of these same allegations in not just this area. This story tells you why we exist, but it's not the only story. There's plenty more. And if you have any stories, you can always put them out through your state rep, through your senator, or even through civicoutlaws.com on the whistleblower page. So the catalyst of all this was Jack's Inc., doing business as Gentleman Quarters. Jack's, a long-standing lake area business that has operated for decades and by testimony has been in the community for almost 40 years with the same liquor license, with the same premises, with everything all the same. At a December 3, 2025 hearing, counsel emphasized that the establishment had operated in essentially the same position for years and had almost 40 years of community presence. At the same hearing, the record underscores what Civic Outlaws views as the deeper issue: a state agency using a licensing lever to impose consequences that look and feel punitive without procedural protections that normally attach when government accuses someone of a crime. This article is written to be diplomatic, but it is not written to be timid. If the public is expected to obey the law, the government should be expected to stay in its lane, read the statute, and follow it. That is not a radical position. It's the old American idea. So old, it used to be called civics. The U.S. Supreme Court corrects a decades-long civics problems. For years, the default operating system of modern government has been agency interpretation. Legislatures wrote broad rules, agencies filled in the details, courts often deferred. That deference has been increasingly questioned nationwide. By citizens, by the way. The U.S. Supreme Court's June 2024 decision in Loper Bright v. Raimundo, 603 U.S., and they haven't picked a number yet because it's so new, is commonly described as rejecting, overturning Chevron deference to bureaucratic interpretation and recentering courts as the preferred interpreter of statutory meaning. Missouri's own administrative review statute, RSMO 536-140, moved in the same direction in an amendment effective August 28, 2025. A recent Cole County Circuit Court order from January 2026 quotes the heart of that statute. By the way, I believe this is the first appearance of a court having to interpret 536.140 after the change of the legislature. So I think this is important, what the court does here. So this bears following out in Cole County Court. Let's see. But the quote there says, "The court shall decide all questions of law without deference to any prior determination that may have been made on the question by the agency," just like the statute 536.140 reflects. That sentence is the point. It's the dividing line between a government of laws and a government bureaucrat deciding that we interpret however we want. Civic Outlaws' view is blunt. The modern administrative state trains the system to treat agency interpretation as expertise, but bureaucratic confidence is not legislative intent and no replacement for constitutional authority. Legitimacy comes from a statute, not from a bureaucrat's job title. The Jack's litigation sits on that fault line. The state's position, stated openly in December 3rd, is that the ATC can look beyond Chapter 311 and use good moral character as a kind of universal hook. If you violate the law, you lack respect for the law. And that can be used to restrict or deny alcohol licensure. Now, pause for a second. That's nonsense. It's a good sentence. But who gets to define my good moral character? Some bureaucrat? Hell no. I want the good moral character to at least be defined by the statute, by the legislature. Anyway, I continue. If you violate the law, you lack respect for the law, and that can be used to restrict or deny alcohol licensure. The plaintiff's position is that this becomes a backdoor criminal enforcement regime, particularly where the law being invoked is outside of ATC's licensing lane statutorily, and instead is administrative enforcement of a criminal code carrying penalties arguably worse than criminal consequences. The going 73 in a 70 program. Who decides what's preposterous and where does it stop? The December 3rd transcript of the Cole County Circuit Court hearing contains a moment that should matter to anyone who has ever dealt with an agency that thinks bureaucratic discretion is a blank check. During argument about good moral character, the court tested the state's logic. If moral character equals respect for the law, does any alleged violation of the law count? The court pressed. So I'm going 73 in a 70. Do I lack respect for the law? Where does that lie? The Assistant Attorney General responds by calling that example preposterous, explaining that no one would use that as an excuse to revoke a license and that any such attempt would be overturned. But the exchange is not about speeding. It's about structural weakness in the state's theory. The difference between enforcement and overreach becomes whatever the agency, and later a judge, might decide is reasonable, preposterous, or ludicrous in hindsight. How is that any sort of licensure standard? Is the public expected to live under such restrictions without question? Must long-standing businesses bleed money in real time between the interpretation and the ultimate conclusion of the case? Apparently so. And I say that because temporary relief was not granted to the license holder. He was, for reasons outlined here, we'll get here. And you know, that decision is the decision. It's not the ultimate decision. We'll get to that in a minute. If the rule is we can treat any alleged violation of any statute as evidence of bad character, the next question is unavoidable. And it really is. Which alleged violation will be treated as serious enough to punish a business owner by restriction of the business's liquor license? Curious, isn't it? Who decides? How consistently? With what written standard? And with what due process when the agency's accusation is of alleged criminal activity? Jack's licensure choice and the reality of coercion. A recurring theme in these disputes is the word voluntary. Agencies love that word. If a business voluntarily alters operations, governments get to deny responsibility for the consequences. The December 3rd transcript shows why Civic Outlaws rejects that framing. The testimony reflects that Jack's could sell liquor inside its establishment for nearly 40 years, up until June 27, 2025. That was the day their liquor license was denied for 2026, or the 2025-2026 year. And that after their denial, ATC deigned to allow the sale of alcohol outside the facility, but not inside. They could sell it out in the yard. The record reflects the practical problem. After documents and conversations with ATC, the witness testified that the ATC made it very clear they were not going to give me a license to operate inside of the establishment. So they forced him to agree to only outside. And you could argue about the, because it's his bad character that he's operating inside because he's allegedly breaking the law. But he still has, isn't bad character dependent upon the person and not dependent upon the location? This is nonsense. That's the gun to the head issue. If you limit your licensed premises, you aren't, you have good character if you limit your license. But if you don't limit your license, you don't have good character. Nonsense. Anyway, that's the gun to the head issue in plain English. When government controls your license and says you can operate, but only if you accept these restraints, when your business is shut down by government overreach, calling agreement compliance and voluntary is legal fiction. Civic Outlaws' position is that a licensing system cannot be allowed to function as a coercion machine that accomplishes through conditions what the government would struggle to prove through criminal process. At the same here, the SOB statute and the bootstrapping problem, Chapter 311 as a portal into Chapter 573. 573 is a criminal statute, which ATC has no authority to enforce. At the same hearing, counsel for ATC conceded an important historical point. He stated that he was unaware of this statute that 573 prohibited the sale of alcohol at gentlemen's clubs, where it had been being sold for 40 years, by the way, until he discovered it in 2022. That's a remarkable admission on its face. It suggests that for years, whatever enforcement existed was inconsistent, localized, or simply not pursued the way it is now. The administrators changed it around. The state's theory is that none of that matters because the agency is applying administrative law. Even if it's 573, they're only applying it administratively. And 311.060 requires all licensees to possess good moral character, which it defines as respect for the law. So in other words, we can use Chapter 311's licensing standard to enforce compliance with other laws we have no statutory grant of power to enforce. And they don't. Civic Outlaws calls that bootstrapping, using an administrative licensing statute as a portal into criminal law enforcement without any criminal procedure. This is not abstract. The hearing record reflects the plaintiff's argument that there had been no finding that any criminal violation of any relevant criminal standard other than the agent said so, and that the administrative process is effectively declaring him guilty of a criminal violation without due process and without the protection of criminal burdens of proof. The state, for its part, argued that the underlying sexually oriented business determination remained pending at the Administrative Hearing Commission, but that the business model itself is predicated upon alcoholic sales in that context. Whether one agrees with the state's policy goal or not, Civic Outlaws' point is procedural. If a statute carries criminal consequences and social stigma, the government should not be able to achieve the same effect through administrative shortcuts and discretionary labels. If he's guilty of a crime, charge him with a crime. Don't steal his alcohol license. In short, that's nonsense. And he's not, by the way. Even what they're alleging he did is not violating the law. It's him allowing other people to allegedly violate the law in another spot. It's nonsense, the whole thing. The court orders careful, preliminary, and still a long road. It is tempting, especially in public-facing advocacy, to treat a judge's initial order as the decision. They were in the court. They were only asking for preliminary orders to allow him to go back to the way he was operating before. That would be inaccurate here, and Civic Outlaws does not want to misstate the posture. The January 2026 order on the request for temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction reflects a narrow procedural focus. Injunctions are extraordinary relief, and plaintiffs have to show, among other things, irreparable harm and no adequate remedy at law. So the court denied injunctive relief and importantly did so without reaching any merits argument that Civic Outlaws believes remains on the table. The court stated a practical point that matters going forward. The order notes that Jack held a license for the entire premises and later for outside the bar only. And the only difference was a change in the description of the licensed premises. I think we're going to put up later the transcript of that hearing because it could be interesting for you to read the admissions that they made. I'm not sure. We'll have to figure that out. The order further references argument by the Assistant Attorney General that a voluntary change could be processed by Jax, and notice that Jax had not yet applied to turn it back to the same premises it occupied 40 years earlier. Well, they'd already been told, no, you can't do it. The only way we're giving you a license is if you do it. But what he argued, and the court put in the temporary argument was, well, they say you can change it back. Change it back. Send it out, change it back. And he's put that application out there. I'm sure we'll put most of that out online as well. Because it's important how these administrators act It's wrong. And we'll see what they do to justify this. It's going to be funny. Anyway, the story continues. The article continues too. In plain terms, the case is not over. The court did not hand the state a blank check, and the operational harm continues while the procedural steps play out. That time lag is the problem. Civic Outlaws keeps emphasizing. Courts can correct overreach, eventually. But eventually is cold comfort when a business that sold indoors for years is told it must sell outdoors only through a narrow carve-out during an ongoing fight and in a bitter cold Missouri winter. The police department issue, when an agency renames itself as a police force, enforces criminal statutes like a police force, and then calls it a typo. Civic Outlaws is also focused on a separate unsettling theme. ATC documents that refer to the Alcohol and Tobacco Control Police Department. ATC repeatedly denied using that designation in Sunshine Law correspondence. Then, when confronted with multiple examples of ATC's own produced investigative records using that phrase on a form, responded that it was a mistake. They had done it for at least 5 years. Civic Outlaws views that as implausible on its face. One typo is a mistake. A multi-year pattern of documents branding the agency as a police department is culture. Words matter because they signal posture. Administrative enforcement is supposed to be bounded and reviewable. Police department language signals something else: criminal posture, intimidation, and the implicit threat of punitive power. Civic Outlaws' criticism here is straightforward. If an agency wants to act as a police department, it should be governed like one. Clear statutory authority, clear limits, clear reporting, clear accountability, and constitutional guardrails. And if the ATC is not a police department, it should stop talking like one in its official records, especially when those records are used against citizens and businesses. Who made you the decency czar? Finally, there is the enforcement culture issue, the thing normal people understand immediately, even if they don't know a single statute number. Civic Outlaws has described, including in its own documentary content on its website, civicoutlaws.com, an episode in which an ATC agent allegedly demanded a license holder at a swim-up bar location at the lake remove a female patron because pubic hair was visible at the edge of her bikini. This story is jarring for a reason. It highlights how quickly alcohol enforcement can morph into morality enforcement, and how quickly discretionary judgments about bodies become leverage over business licenses. Even leaving aside the specifics of that anecdote, the underlying concern is real and recurring. Who gave an ATC agent the authority to decide on site what is lewd enough to jeopardize a license? What written standards govern that decision? Is it uniform across the state? Is it appealable in time to matter? Or is it simply the agent's own morality, backed by the threat of administrative punishment? Civic Outlaws' answer? That is not how legitimate government is supposed to work. If the legislature wants an agency to enforce a morality code, it can say so clearly, define it carefully, and cabin it tightly. If it has not done that, interpretation becomes freelancing bureaucracy. And freelancing with licensing power is nothing but coercion. Why Civic Outlaws exists and what comes next. The creation of Civic Outlaws is not a branding exercise. It is a response to a pattern, administrative discretion expanding into areas that look criminal, moral, and punitive without corresponding procedural protections. Jax is the origin of that story, but not the end point. Civic Outlaws intends to track and publish on a range of civil liberties and overreach issues, including surveillance tools like flock cameras, search and seizure boundaries, bureaucratic lockdown power, remember COVID, and the growing habit of treating citizens as subjects who must plead for permission instead of rights-bearing adults who can demand justification. Some will call that anti-government. It isn't. It's pro-constitutional. It's the old-school position. Government must be limited, transparent, and accountable, precisely because it is powerful. And yes, the Jack's litigation is still in the long game. The court's orders to date are preliminary, careful, and procedural in important respects. Meanwhile, the legal fight continues over what authority ATC actually has, how it uses discretionary character and lewdness, and whether the administrative process is being used to impose consequences that belong in a criminal courtroom with full due process. Civic Outlaws will keep watching, not because it enjoys conflict, although I do, but because government creep only grows when ignored. If the public has learned anything in the past few years, regardless of your political tribe, it is this: unchecked government does not stay polite for long. And that's the conclusion of the article, Friends and Neighbors. I put in about the author part down there, and I'm going to read that just because it's self-promotion. Samuel Trapp's founding member of Civic Outlaws and Modern Law Ecosystem, initiatives focused on exposing administrative overreach, defending civil liberties, and restoring statutory limits on government power. He's also the host of the daily Lake of the Ozarks Dam radio program, International Flavor, where he examines legal, political, and international developments through the lens of constitutional accountability and institutional restraint. What is that? A longtime critic of unchecked administrative authority, Trapp writes and speaks frequently on government creep across regulatory, licensing, and professional discipline systems. The end. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the very first re-recording of Civic Outlaws show this AM. I am Samuel Trapp. We intend that on Dam Radio, for damradio.com/live is where you can listen to great music all the time and very good talk programs very frequently throughout the week. And you can listen to podcast versions of all of those things at damradio.com/podcast. Everybody's out there. Ike Skelton's out there. And Ike's got, the horror story, the horror tale told about his run-in with the overzealous regulatory lot and criminal lot, and who can blame him for the resolution of that horrific issue. But more needs to be done about flock cameras, about police departments taking the power that they are taking on the administrative side, and about administrative side taking police power into their own. It's nonsense. You just grow your own power because you're working in the government. I dishonor, I dislike, I despise such activities. Stay where you've been permitted to be. You're just a government employee, and you need to do what the government intends to you, and that on its base terms is look out for the public first, and yourself and your organization, and increasing power to a much lesser degree. And if you're out there, or you consider it in light of some of the people and what the Missouri legislature required under the new version of 536.140, perhaps you, Mr. Bureaucrat, should read that. And I appreciate you listening to this program. I I think it's wonderful. I have a song I want to look for while I go out. It's from a favorite movie of mine, and it's not going to be part of the record on this show, but I'm looking for it, and I want to make sure it gets set up properly so that I can play that, and then I shall depart the studio. So I appreciate you listening. I hope you listen to Civic Outlaws every Friday morning, 7:30 to about 8:45. And I hope you listen to International Flavor with me every morning, Monday through Thursday, 7:30 to 9 a.m. And that is the end of the show. I hope you have a very, very nice day. And I want to play for you something that's pretty funny. Well, you know what? You won't understand it anyway. So I'll do that another time, and I will have my music ready for the next time that I stop them. And so right now we're going to kick you back to your music that you like so much here on Damn Radio. JR puts a pretty good pile of music together for us, and so I encourage you to listen to all of the talk here, but also all of the wonderful music that plays when the talk is not ongoing. Have a very nice day. See you next time.